Elias Ward
The
had
stars
always
are
believed that the
beautiful
land
tonight.
spoke
Yeah,
before people
they really
did
are.
quiet. Steady and honest in a way humans rarely were, and on that blistering afternoon on the edge of Broken Mesa, he swore he heard it whisper a warning just seconds before the horse beneath him bucked, twisted, and sent him tumbling down the ridge like a rag doll tossed by a temperamental giant until everything blurred into a spinning haze of dust, pain, and distant thunderheads gathering like dark sentinels over the plains. When he finally cracked open one eye, dizzy and half convinced he was hallucinating, the first thing he saw wasn't the sky or his frightened gelding circling nearby, but a woman's face sunburned, fierce, framed by wind-whipped dark hair, and a look in her eye that said she had no patience for dying cowboys cluttering her land. And before he could form a thought, her mouth was on his, warm and firm and tasting faintly of wild mint, sending a jolt through him stronger than the fall had. Then air rushed into his lungs in a violent gasp he couldn't control, and she pulled back, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand like he was an inconvenience she'd had to fix, muttering something about stubborn idiots who forgot the basics of breathing. That's when he croaked, voice hoarse, You kissed me while I was out. And she didn't even hesitate, just raised one brow with a smirk sharp enough to cut wire fencing and said, I saved your life, cowboy. Don't flatter yourself. She stood then, boots planted firmly in the dirt, and Elias, still sprawled on the ground, realized several things at once. 1. He could barely move. 2. A storm was rolling in fast. And 3. The stranger, this woman who didn't smile kindly or speak softly, was the most breathtaking thing he had ever seen. Her name, she finally offered as she crouched again to check his ribs with surprisingly gentle fingers, was Rowan Hawley, and she owned the stretch of land he'd just cratered into. Elias recognized the surname instantly. The Hawley family had been feuding with the Wards for generations, though no one remembered exactly why anymore. He braced himself for anger or accusation, but instead she sighed, shook her head, and said she didn't give a damn about ancient grudges when a man was one wrong move away from never walking again. With the storm growling on the horizon, she hauled him to his feet, half lifting, half dragging toward an old lime cabin tucked between sandstone cliffs. The world swayed around him. Her voice steadied it. Inside the cabin, thunder shook the walls as Rowan set his shoulder, cleaned his scrapes, and forced him to drink something that tasted like fire but cleared his fogged senses instantly. Every time he drifted, he felt her hand press against his chest to keep him awake, and every time she touched him, something hot and alive sparked under his skin. As night fell and the storm raged, Elias tried to thank her, tried to make sense of the kiss, the fall, the woman who seemed both irritated by him and unwilling to leave his side. She ignored every question, tending him with a briskness that felt like a shield until at last, when he caught her wrist lightly, she froze. For a heartbeat, the angry storm outside seemed to hush. Rowan met his eyes with a guarded expression, and in that moment he realized she wasn't fearless. She was simply someone who refused to let others see her fear. She pulled her hand free, told him to rest, and moved to the fire, her silhouette framed in gold. But Elias, stubborn, even half broken, wasn't ready to let the mystery go. Why'd you bring me here? He asked softly. She didn't turn. Because I'm not letting a Ward die on my watch, she said. Not tonight, not ever. The words lingered in the dim cabin between them, heavy with meanings he couldn't decipher yet. As the storm hammered the world outside and the sparks between them glowed hotter than the fire itself, Elias woke to the scent of rain-soaked earth and burning cedar, disoriented until the memory of falling, the storm, and Rowan's mouth on his slammed back into him, leaving him wide awake and inexplicably anxious in a way he hadn't felt since he was a boy, learning how to ride broncs. Rowan sat by the fire sipping coffee, boots crossed, posture deceptively relaxed, though the tension in her jaw told him she hadn't slept at all. When she noticed him stirring, she only said, "Good, you're alive," before tossing him a tin cup and telling him to drink, because they had a long conversation ahead of them. Elias tried to stand, winced, and she immediately crossed the room, steadying him with strong, calloused hands that made his pulse kick. But the moment she sensed his awareness of her touch, she stepped back like the contact had burned her. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. But inside the cabin, a different kind of storm was building, one composed of family history, buried truths, unspoken attraction, and a tension so thick it might as well have been tangible. Rowan finally sat across from him and revealed the truth that cracked his world open. Years ago, long before Elias or Rowan were old enough to understand feuds or land disputes, her father and Elias's uncle had struck a secret deal involving water rights, one that went catastrophically wrong. Everyone believed tragedy and betrayal sparked the rivalry, but Rowan had evidence that it was actually a misunderstanding twisted by a third party who profited from the family's conflict. Her father had tried to fix it. His uncle had tried to confess, and both had been silenced by the feud's momentum. Rowan had been gathering proof to expose the lie, to end the generations-old hatred, but she hadn't told a soul until now. When Elias demanded why she'd trust him with something that dangerous, she looked him straight in the eyes, voice low and raw, and said, "Because last night, when I thought you might die on that ridge, I realized I'd rather face the wrath of both our families than watch you disappear." The confession cracked something open between them that neither could patch shut. He reached for her hand, but she stood abruptly, pacing like a caged Mustang, muttering that this wasn't supposed to happen, that she didn't save him to start something she wasn't ready for. But when he quietly said, "Rowan, you kissed me," she spun around, cheeks flushed, declaring it was CPR and not to get any romantic cowboy ideas. Elias, still sore and stubborn, said, "Then do it again," without the life or death excuse. Her eyes widened, emotions warring: fear, want, frustration, desire, until she stalked toward him, stopping just inches away, voice barely a whisper. "I don't kiss men who can't stand on their own defeat." His grin was slow, dangerous, and she immediately cursed under her breath, realizing he'd taken that as a challenge. Before they could say more, hoofbeats sounded outside, multiple riders sending Rowan straight into defensive action. She grabbed her rifle, tossed him a pistol, and whispered that the feud might not be dead yet. Elias, pain forgotten, moved to the window and saw riders bearing the colors of both families, an impossibility that made his blood run cold. When the door burst open moments later, it wasn't violence that met them, but urgency. A group of younger cousins from each family, ones who had grown tired of the feud and followed Rowan after seeing her gathering evidence. They wanted peace, they wanted truth, and they needed Elias to stand with Rowan to make it happen. Rowan hesitated, fear flashing across her features, not fear of danger, but fear of what standing beside Elias might mean. But he reached out, steadying her in a mirror of how she'd steadied him, and said softly, "If we end this feud together, there's nothing left to keep you from kissing me again." She glared at him, but her mouth twitched like she was fighting a smile. With all eyes behind them, they rode out as the morning sun cut through the clearing clouds, determined to confront the ones who had manipulated both families for decades. Whatever came next, truth, redemption, danger, love, the spark that had ignited between them in that storm-struck cabin refused to be extinguished. And as they approached the ranch boundaries where everything would change, Rowan leaned close enough that her breath brushed his ear and whispered, "Don't slow me down, cowboy." Elias only grinned, knowing damn well that she wasn't talking about the horses anymore.